Have you ever wondered why the very storms that shake others to their core barely ruffle your spirit? Have you ever felt the weight of people mocking your warnings, only to watch them panic when the very thing you foresaw begins to unfold? And now can you see how what once looked like isolation was really God positioning you to stand calm while the world trembles? Chosen one, the truth is this: God did not leave you blind. He sharpened your vision. He placed a fire of discernment inside of you that no amount of doubt, ridicule, or dismissal could put out. While others laughed, God whispered secrets of the unseen into your spirit. While others said, "It's not that deep," He showed you layers that went beyond the surface. And when they claimed you were overreacting, God was quietly rewiring your mind to operate on a frequency far higher than theirs. Now, here you are, not frantic, not shaken, not running in circles, but sitting in a seat of clarity, watching everything you already knew come to pass. This isn't arrogance, it's divine confirmation. You saw it before the world did because heaven made sure you would never be caught off guard. And that means you're not just surviving this storm, you're about to rise from it stronger, more vindicated, and more radiant than ever before. So, buckle your seatbelt, because what's coming next will not only explain why your discernment was never ordinary, but why this very panic is the loudest proof that God set you apart. Type 777 inches, the comments if you're ready for the full revelation. And to those who have supported through likes, shares, comments, or even super thanks, thank you deeply. Your presence is priceless here. Now let's dive into the truth that's about to unfold before your very eyes. God's chosen ones. Everyone's panicking, but you saw it before the world did. What they mocked as paranoia was never paranoia at all. It was prophecy in motion. They told you that you were negative, too quiet, too suspicious, always in your head. But what they labeled as weakness was in fact the sharp edge of discernment. Your spirit was picking up signals like hidden radio frequencies, vibrations their egos could never interpret. While they lived blinded by appearances, you were receiving coded warnings from heaven itself. Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. Amos 3-7. You were not fearful, you were faithful. You were not trembling, you were being trained. Think back, why did your chest tighten when you entered certain rooms? Why did silence suddenly feel heavy when specific people smiled at you? Was that fear? Or was it revelation stitched into your very being? The temple of your soul became like a sanctuary of divine signals, built not to echo panic, but to capture whispers from eternity. The tension was never random. It was the prophetic silence of Jeremiah, who was scorned until every word he spoke unfolded in fire. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Jeremiah 1-5. You were not losing your mind. You were catching what others had numbed themselves against. While they partied in delusion, you were awake in revelation. That unease was the spirit guarding you from traps dressed as opportunities. The Italian painter Caravaggio, known for his dramatic chiaroscuro, once said, through his work, that light always reveals what darkness tries to hide. In the same way, you saw cracks in smiles long before betrayal erupted. You felt the hollowness in applause before corruption surfaced. Opportunities that glittered in gold on the outside you knew were poisoned fruit. You refused to bite, and they laughed at your refusal. They said you were dramatic, fragile, arrogant. But every no you spoke was an alignment to God's yes for your destiny. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, Galatians 6-7. And now what is left of their laughter? Where are their bold accusations? The same ones who ridiculed you are whispering in panic, asking how you knew. But how could you not know, when your spirit was tuned to heaven's warnings? The German composer Bach wrote in his cantata Jesu, Meine Freude, though the world may rage, my spirit clings to Christ. That is what you embodied, a soul clinging to Christ while others clung to applause. Still, a question echoes, why were you able to see what they could not? Because you were not relying on sight, you were relying on alignment. The psalmist declared, Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119-105. Sight sees surface, but light penetrates shadows. Your discernment wasn't born in suspicion, but in intimacy with God. That is why you walked away when everyone else stayed laughing. That is why you rejected the handshake that carried hidden daggers. That is why you left rooms that smelled of betrayal before betrayal shouted its name. And what of you now? Chosen one? Now that the storm has broken, masks ripped away, the world sees what you carried in silence. You were never paranoid. You were prophetically positioned, while others drowned in their own denial. You stood firm on revelation. And as the prophet Isaiah reminds us, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. Isaiah 26-3. This is the hour to rise, not with apology, but with authority. Lift your head, chosen one. Walk as the sentinel heaven designed you to be. Stand as the watchtower that refuses slumber. The panic of the world only confirms your purpose. Now it is time to step into the stage God has been preparing all along. Rise. Your discernment was never a burden. It was your crown. Your isolation was never punishment. It was preservation. At first, it baffled you why God was pulling you away from certain people, certain places, certain rhythms of life you thought you belonged to. One moment you were giving your all, pouring into the crowd, carrying burdens that weren't even yours. And the next, it felt like everything was stripped away piece by piece. You tried to hold on, didn't you? You fought to make it work. And when your grip failed, you blamed yourself for the silence that followed. But what looked like abandonment was God's hand of rescue. Come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. 2 Corinthians 6:17. Pause here. Why did certain doors slam shut so quickly? Why did relationships that seemed unshakable suddenly collapse like sandcastles in the tide? Could it be that God was not taking something from you but shielding you from something? You weren't rejected, you were rescued. You weren't cut off, you were covered. The distance that felt like loneliness was divine distance. A firewall between you and the infection about to spread in the very environment you once trusted. The same people who laughed with you were secretly spiraling. The same circles you wept over were preparing to implode. The very places you once walked freely were about to become toxic ground. If you had stayed longer, you would have been swallowed by their collapse. But God closed the door, locked it, and carried you into solitude. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. What felt like isolation was actually insulation. You weren't abandoned, you were preserved. Nature itself whispers the truth of this. The redwood tree, towering in silence, grows stronger, not in crowded fields, but when its roots intertwine with a hidden network underground. unseen by the eye, yet guarded from decay. Or the butterfly's cocoon, it looks like confinement, but it is protection from predators until wings are ready. Like them, your cocoon season was heaven's shield over your destiny. And history shows the same pattern in reverse for those who refuse to separate. Consider Judas Iscariot, who clung to the wrong company and let greed blind him. 30 silver coins became his snare, and isolation came not as protection but as despair. His refusal to step away from corruption ended in betrayal and self-destruction. In contrast, your separation was God's mercy. He pulled you away so that you would not share the fate of those who ignored every warning. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Psalm 34-19. Yet still, the questions echo. Why did it feel so crushing? Why did nights stretch into what felt like exile? Why did silence cut deeper than words ever could? Because heaven was doing surgery. The scalpel of separation cut away what your loyalty would not release. And while you mourned what was lost, angels were already rejoicing over what was preserved. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91:1. Now look at the contrast. They are panicking, scrambling for peace they cannot find, watching everything crumble. The very ones who said you were weak now spend sleepless nights, their decisions echoing back on them. But you carry peace, not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer entangled in their storm. Like the eagle soaring above thunderclouds, you were lifted to higher air while they wrestled in the lightning below. An old hymn, "Abide with me," carries these words. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. That hymn echoes your reality. Every human support fell away, yet God himself abided with you. They called it abandonment. You called it heartbreak, but heaven called it lifeline. What they labeled exile was actually exodus. What they labeled rejection was redirection. And now, chosen one, you stand preserved. Grace has written its covering across your story. Separation was never personal, it was prophetic. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Isaiah 43:19. You were shielded from collapse because God intends for you to carry victory. So rise. No more shame for being set apart. No more tears wasted on circles you outgrew. No more apologies for doors that shut while others mocked. You were not left behind, you were pulled ahead. Stand tall, chosen one. The very isolation that once felt like your grave is now revealed as your gateway. This is not the season to shrink back, this is the hour to step forward. Crowned by the distance that preserved you. Your eyes were never ordinary. They were instruments of divine detection. While others stared at surfaces, weighed smiles, and counted empty compliments, you were decoding the architecture of behavior itself. They called you guarded, suspicious, or too analytical. But in truth, you were operating on a higher frequency. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil, Hebrews 5:14. While they obsessed over appearance, you were discerning resonance. You didn't just see what people wanted you to see, you intercepted the patterns they tried to bury. Their words vibrated one way, but the undertones carried contradictions. Your spirit caught instantly. Have you noticed how your chest tightened when a fake laugh filled the air? Or how silence grew heavy when deception entered the room? Was that paranoia, or was it God sharpening your discernment? This sensitivity wasn't about gossip or drama. You weren't walking around looking for faults, but your very presence triggered fear in those hiding double lives. They knew subconsciously that you could pierce through their mask. For the Word of God is alive and active. Sharper than any double-edged sword, it judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Hebrews 4:12. You embodied that sharpness not to destroy, but to expose the gap between illusion and truth. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called micro-expressions, tiny facial movements that betray hidden emotion in fractions of a second. You, chosen one, picked up on spiritual micro-expressions long before they became visible. In physics, resonance describes how one vibration can expose weakness in a hidden structure. You were that resonance in human form. People feared you not because you caused chaos, but because your presence disturbed their fragile illusions. The fear of being seen made them label you the problem. Isn't it strange? Why would they prefer blindness over truth? Why would they rather cling to illusion than face exposure? Yet this has always been humanity's struggle. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. But freedom requires honesty, and honesty terrifies those addicted to masks. To ground this in ordinary life, consider Lena, a quiet librarian in a small town. People mocked her for always sensing when someone was dishonest. She once warned her community about a charming investor who promised prosperity. No one listened. Months later, he was arrested for fraud, leaving many bankrupt. Suddenly, the same people who called her paranoid admitted she had seen what they refused to acknowledge. Isn't that your story too? The sensitivity they mocked was the very shield they needed. Art and music echo this reality. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, the prince stages a play to catch the conscience of the king. Truth revealed itself not through words, but through reaction. A shift no mask could hide. Similarly, when Bach layered harmonies in his St. Matthew Passion, he built musical architecture where every dissonance demanded resolution, just as your discernment demanded truth to surface. History reminds us of villains blinded by arrogance. Consider Haman in the Book of Esther. He constructed gallows for Mordecai, only to be hanged on them himself. His pride kept him blind to God's orchestration. Those around you who dismissed your instincts share the same fate. What they built on lies is now collapsing on their own heads. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. You weren't reading too much into things, you were reading the truth, heaven whispered. That is why you keep your distance from certain circles. That is why you never trusted every smile. That is why you felt tension in rooms where laughter flowed freely. It wasn't coldness, it was calibration. Watch out that no one deceives you. Matthew 24:4. You were spiritually alert, tuned to warnings, others drowned out with noise. And now the masks have cracked. The idols of friendship are falling. The leaders they once praised are exposed. What they labeled judgment is now revealed as discernment. What they mocked as overthinking is now undeniable reality. You weren't guessing you were ahead. The storm has proven what your spirit sensed long ago. So rise. Do not shrink back from your gift. No longer apologize for the sensitivity heaven planted in you. Stand as the one who sees beyond appearances, the one whose very presence dismantles illusion. The silence of others is proof that everything you felt was real. This is not the time to bow your head, it is the moment to lift it high. Chosen one, rise. For what they feared in you was never suspicion, it was sight. You were the alarm clock, the one their souls desperately needed, yet persistently tried to silence. You weren't seeking control. You weren't trying to dominate or make every conversation about yourself. Your heartbeat was anchored in compassion. Your words rising like a trumpet blast meant to awaken sleepers before disaster struck. Cry aloud. Do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their transgression. Isaiah 58:1. Yet the moment you spoke, you were labeled the problem instead of the prophetic instrument. Why did your voice unsettle them so much? Why did your presence feel like a disruption in rooms that claimed to celebrate truth? Could it be that the light you carried confronted shadows they weren't ready to acknowledge? When you pointed out the cracks in the wall, you weren't trying to ruin the mood, you were trying to prevent collapse. When you warned of danger, you weren't being negative, you were being merciful. Still, they covered their ears, preferring silence over salvation. In a world that worships comfort more than correction, an alarm clock is never welcome. You weren't attacking them, you were alerting them. Yet the very ones you tried to protect turned resentment into a shield. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? Galatians 4:16. The tragedy is that what they labeled as drama was actually direction. And what they mocked as negativity was nothing less than heaven's mercy wrapped in words. History gives us testimony. The German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, executed for resisting the Nazi regime, once declared, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil." His voice was an alarm clock to a sleeping church. But many preferred peace without accountability. Isn't that the same response you faced when people longed for comfort over confrontation? Illusion over integrity, and yet your warnings mirrored the rhythm of creation itself. Consider the rooster. Every dawn it crows faithfully, announcing light before the human eye perceives it. Its cry is not to annoy but to awaken. You were that cry in their midnight, calling them to rise before destruction arrived. Or the canary once carried into coal mines not for music, but for survival, its silence signaled danger. You, too, carried sensitivity that revealed invisible poison long before collapse. Still, they muted you. They called you intense, too heavy, a mood killer. But didn't Jeremiah face the same rejection when he shouted warnings to a city that mocked him until fire consumed it? But if I say, I will not mention his word or speak anymore in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. Jeremiah 20:9. Like Jeremiah, you burned with words that could not stay silent. No matter how many times they tried to dismiss you, a friend of truth always risks being cast as the enemy of peace. Shakespeare's King Lear echoes this. The only daughter who dared tell him the truth, Cordelia, was banished, while flatterers were embraced. Yet, when the kingdom crumbled, Lear realized too late that the alarm clock he silenced was the only one who truly loved him. Doesn't this parallel your story? Those who shut you out now replay your words in their minds, unable to escape the siren of regret. Every ignored warning has now returned, not as your voice, but as their inner torment. The alarms they muted resound louder in memory than they ever did in real time. What you grieved quietly in your spirit before it happened, they now grieve in visible collapse. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes, I will hold the watchman accountable for their blood. Ezekiel 33:6. Yet you did sound the trumpet. You carried the courage to disrupt silence with truth. In the modern world, voice like yours remain rare. Rosa, a young nurse from a rural village, once warned her hospital staff that neglecting sterilization protocols would invite infection, she was dismissed as dramatic, accused of exaggeration. Weeks later, an outbreak struck, validating her cries. Her story mirrors yours, the alarm clock despised until disaster makes the alarm undeniable. So now, chosen one, what does this mean for you? It means you were never the problem. It means their resentment was the reaction of shadows recoiling from light. It means you carried urgency heaven entrusted to you. And the price of that urgency was misunderstanding. But the silence of others proves this truth. You were never making noise, you were carrying a message. And now that their illusions have collapsed, your words stand as the only ones with weight. Their peace without accountability has evaporated. Their fantasy of growth without discomfort is gone. Their denial has imploded, leaving the echo of your warnings as the last sound in their minds. So rise. Do not apologize for being the alarm clock. Do not shrink back because they mistook your care for criticism. Lift your voice again. Chosen one. The world needs sentinels who refuse to sleep when danger is near. What once was rejection is now revelation. Stand tall, for the very sound they hated was the song of their salvation. You were mocked, ridiculed, and labeled strange, not because you were lost, but because you refused to march in rhythm with the herd. They laughed at your silence when they were loud. They mocked your pace when they rushed toward illusions. And they sneered at your refusal to chase what they worshipped. You didn't mimic their slang, their vanity, or their restless hunger for approval. You weren't trying to stand out, it was your spirit that refused to bow to what was hollow. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. That is why you could not blend in, no matter how much they wanted you to. But why did their laughter sting so deeply? Why did their taunts echo in your chest at night when all you wanted was peace? Could it be because deep down you knew the road they celebrated was leading them to collapse? That quiet voice inside whispered, "This isn't for you." And when you obeyed that voice, they made you the punchline. They said you were too spiritual, too antisocial, too different. Yet wasn't Noah mocked too, when he built the ark under clear skies? And when the flood came, didn't the mockers discover too late that obedience was greater than popularity? By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. Hebrews 11:7. You chose values over vanity, purpose over popularity. They couldn't stand your independence because your refusal to conform exposed their dependence on validation. Why did your courage make them so uncomfortable? Because your presence reminded them of the choices they were afraid to make. Instead of admitting their insecurity, they made you an outcast. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Matthew 5:11. Nature itself reveals this pattern. The salmon swims upstream, against the rushing waters, while thousands of weaker fish flow with the current to their end. The eagle soars alone in higher skies, while flocks of smaller birds cluster together, afraid of solitude. You were that salmon, that eagle destined for strength because you embraced the current others feared. Your solitude was not punishment, it was preparation. And history shows us the danger of following the herd. Recall the French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre, who once commanded the mob with fiery speeches. He rode the power of the herd until the herd turned on him, dragging him to the guillotine. His downfall proved what Scripture has long said: the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Proverbs 12:15. The herd that mocks will eventually devour itself, leaving only confusion where applause once reigned. You knew this long before the collapse. That's why you stepped away from circles that were loud but empty. You walked roads that cost you friendships, endured nights where you doubted yourself, but still chose silence over clout. Doesn't it strike you now how the very herd that mocked is in chaos? While you stand on solid ground, their crowds didn't save them, their applause didn't shield them. Their comfort has collapsed into confusion. The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge. Psalm 18:2. That's why your strange path now makes perfect sense. Your distance was your deliverance. The solitude that once felt unbearable was the shelter that preserved you. What they called foolishness has become your fortress. Their desperate scramble for clarity proves the futility of the herd's false security. And now, in the ruins of their illusions, the one they called crazy is the one they now turn to for direction. So Rees, do not apologize for standing apart. Do not shrink back because your obedience made them uncomfortable. Lift your head. Chosen one, the herd has fallen, but you remain, because your steps were guided by something higher than popularity. Stand bold, for the very isolation they mocked has become your crown. Your stillness was never a weakness, it was surveillance designed by heaven. While they misread your silence as ignorance, you were quietly recording every detail like a watchtower designed in the architecture of God's kingdom. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 22:3. You weren't silent because you lacked awareness. You were silent because you knew far too much. Their noise was distraction. Their drama was camouflage. Their performance was for approval. But your calmness was a strategy sharpened in divine timing. Why did they misinterpret your composure as disengagement? Why did your refusal to react make them so uncomfortable? Was it not because your stillness reflected their insecurity? While they scrambled for attention, you sat steady, processing, tracking patterns like a mathematician observing trajectories. They mistook your lack of movement as being behind, but you were steps ahead, quietly charting the trajectory of collapse before the first crack appeared. The psalmist wrote, "Be still, and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. Your stillness wasn't absence, it was alignment. You spoke only when heaven required it. You didn't waste energy reacting to shadows, you waited for substance. You saw their insecurities unraveling in real time. The nervous laugh, the constant need for validation, the subtle contradiction in their stories. Your silence became the mirror that reflected what they wanted hidden. Science itself offers metaphors for what you carried. In physics, there is a concept of signal to noise. Ratio clarity comes not from adding more sound, but by reducing interference. That was you. While they created noise, your silence amplified the signal. In psychology, strategic non-reaction is known as observational control, allowing the observer to map hidden motives. And in architecture, a cathedral's arches hold weight, not by rushing upward, but by distributing pressure in stillness. Your life carried that same design, strength through restraint. You were never passive. You were tuned in on another level, like a radio set to a frequency they didn't know existed. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says. Revelation 2-7. You knew who was playing both sides, who whispered behind your back, who wore masks while shaking your hand. You weren't gossiping in the group chat, yet you knew their entire script months before the scene unfolded. They thought you were sleeping, but you were awake in ways they could not comprehend. History is filled with people who misunderstood silence. Consider Pontius Pilate, who mistook Jesus' silence at trial as weakness, not realizing he was fulfilling prophecy. But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Matthew 27-14. What Pilate perceived as powerlessness was power restrained. Strategy sealed in stillness. Likewise, your quietness was not surrender, but divine discipline. Even ordinary life reflects this truth. Daniel, a bus driver from a small town, was mocked for being quiet and unambitious. While others ridiculed him, he quietly studied investments at night. Years later, when the company he drove for collapsed, Daniel had already built enough wealth to retire early. His silence was his strategy. Isn't that the same way God used your hiddenness not to humiliate you, but to protect and prepare you? Nature itself speaks of this mystery. The owl hunts silently at night, hearing what no other creature detects. The glacier, moving slowly and quietly, reshape entire landscapes over centuries. Stillness does not equal weakness, it equals unseen power. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. Isaiah 40-31. You weren't delayed, you were being elevated. And now the truth is undeniable. The same people who thought you were disconnected are scrambling in confusion. The same ones who mocked your silence are begging for clarity. But you already have the blueprint because you never stopped watching. You tracked what was unsaid, discerned what was hidden, processed what they ignored. Their panic is proof of their blindness, but your peace is proof of your preparation. So Rize, do not explain your stillness to those who prefer noise. Do not apologize for the discipline heaven gave you. Lift your head, chosen one. The silence they called weakness has become your shield. The distance they mocked has become your vision. The restraint they ridiculed has become your strength. Now is not the hour to hide, it is the hour to stand. Because your silence was never absent, it was elevated. You were never afraid of being called crazy, because you understood something most people deny. Truth rarely comes wrapped in elegance. Truth isn't always neat, teethy, or popular. It can be raw, disruptive, even offensive. Yet you knew what you saw, you knew what you felt, and you knew what was coming long before the clouds gathered. And when you dared to speak it aloud, their stares pierced you like daggers. They whispered that you had lost your mind. They smirked, shook their heads, and dismissed your warnings. Why did your clarity make them so uncomfortable? Was it because illusions feel safer than reality? Was it because your conviction shattered the masks they clung to? But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. 1 Corinthians 1:27. When they called you foolish, God was revealing his strategy. You didn't flinch under their accusations. You didn't retreat or soften your words just to make them easier to swallow. You refused to dilute the vision to protect their comfort. They cared about preserving an image. You cared about preserving integrity. They worshipped applause. You worshipped alignment. The truth sounded wild to them. But wasn't Jeremiah mocked when he prophesied disaster to a nation that wanted peace at any cost? Didn't they throw him into a cistern, hoping his silence would buy them relief? Yet the flood came, and the prophet they called mad was proven right. The word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long. Jeremiah 20:8. That scripture echoes your life, the courage to bear reproach, because heaven's message mattered more than your reputation. A modern example reminds us of this same tension. The painter Vincent van Gogh was ridiculed during his lifetime. Labeled unstable, eccentric, mad. He sold only one painting while alive. Yet his vision saw beauty others could not comprehend. Today, his art is celebrated across the world. Doesn't this mirror your journey? What they laughed at then, they now scramble to embrace. The very insight dismissed as insanity is revealed, in time, as genius. You didn't care about looking polished, you cared about being prepared. You didn't need their praise, you needed to stay real. That kind of bravery cannot be manufactured by ego, it can only be forged in clarity. Jesus himself said, "You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." Matthew 10:22. What they labeled hysteria was heaven's clarity. What they called dramatic was divine urgency. Poets and musicians have captured this tension too. In Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, a haunting phrase rises in the Kyrie, Miserere nobis, have mercy on us. The notes tremble with desperation, breaking the illusion of harmony to reveal humanity's raw cry for truth. Your voice carried that same dissonance. It didn't fit their shallow rhythm, but it carried eternity's resonance. Why did they twist your words into instability? Why did they try to gaslight you, painting your discernment as fear, your foresight as delusion? Because illusions are fragile, and your presence threatened the scaffolding of lies they had built. For we cannot do anything against the truth, but only for the truth. 2 Corinthians 13:8. Time itself has proven you right. Now those who laughed nervously are replaying your warnings in their heads, realizing the storm you spoke of has already struck. And even in ordinary life, the same story unfolds. Maria, a school janitor in a small city, warned the staff about structural cracks in the building that didn't look safe. They ignored her, accusing her of being paranoid. Months later, a section of the roof collapsed during a storm. No children were hurt, only because the school had closed that day. Suddenly, the woman once ridiculed as crazy was recognized as the one who truly saw. Isn't that the power of foresight? Now the same people who ridiculed you are scrambling for answers. They are backpedaling, trying to make sense of chaos, whispering, "You said this would happen," not because you wanted to be right, but because you were built to see beyond the surface. They chased trends, you chased truth. They played with illusions, you prepared for storms. Your discernment didn't need their validation. Your insight wasn't fear, it was foresight. Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants the prophets. Amos 3-7. So rise. Do not apologize for clarity. Do not bow to the crowd that once mocked your vision. The storm has revealed what time always proves. Truth may be mocked in the beginning, but it is crowned in the end. Stand bold. Chosen one. What they once called madness is the mantle God gave you. Your sight was never a delusion, it was design. Your premonitions were never coincidence, they were spiritual data flowing from realms unseen. What surged in your chest wasn't random intuition. What kept you awake at night wasn't anxiety. What jolted you from your dreams wasn't imagination. It was a raw transmission, an unfiltered download of divine intelligence straight from heaven's command center. Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants the prophets. Amos 3-7. You didn't request this burden, but it arrived uninvited, undeniable, encoded into your spirit. Why did your body feel like an alert system, tightening before disaster struck? Why did your dreams replay scenes you haven't lived yet? Could it be that God wired you to receive signals ahead of schedule so others might be spared? While they clung to the physical, you carried the spiritual. While they chased evidence, you carried revelation. While they dismissed warning, you discerned prophecy. Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Jeremiah 33:3. Your dreams weren't ordinary, they were reports from eternity. Your unease wasn't weakness, it was data delivered from the throne room. But in a world addicted to proof, where people only trust what can be Googled, your words sounded like nonsense. They rolled their eyes when you said something felt wrong. They laughed when you sensed a tension shift. They dismissed you as dramatic when you couldn't sleep the night before betrayal was exposed. Yet weren't Joseph's brothers the same when he shared his dreams? Here comes that dreamer, they sneered. Genesis 37:19. But the very dreams they mocked became the blueprint for their survival. In nature, there are creatures designed to sense danger long before others. Elephants that hear infrasound miles away. Whales that navigate through unseen frequencies deep beneath the sea. You were crafted with the same sensitivity, wired not for panic but for preparation. Their numbness to the spirit didn't cancel your assignment, it only magnified the gap between blindness and sight. History also reminds us of those who ignored prophetic signals. The people of Pompeii dismissed small tremors and whispers of warning before Vesuvius erupted, burying their city in fire and ash. Their arrogance in clinging to comfort became their downfall. In contrast, your willingness to act on invisible warnings preserved you from collapse. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 22:3. And what of you, chosen one? You didn't need the full picture, you moved on fragments, trusting the signal. Your faith was your GPS, guiding you where maps failed, while others demanded certainty. You obeyed whispers. They mocked your hesitation when opportunities glittered on the surface. But now they see the trap you avoided. They ridiculed your sleepless nights. But now they sit awake in chaos, asking how you knew. Their confusion is your confirmation. Even in ordinary life, this truth shines. Elena, a cashier in a small grocery store, once felt a deep unease about joining a seemingly lucrative community investment scheme. She refused despite ridicule. Months later, the scheme collapsed, leaving dozens bankrupt. What looked like fear was her spirit interpreting unseen signals. Isn't that the same pattern? You carried the ridicule first, the revelation later. Music and art echo this reality. In Mozart's Requiem, the Dies Irae thunders with urgency, capturing a sense of doom before destruction appears. The dissonance unsettles the listener, not to entertain, but to awaken. Your premonitions carried that same unsettling sound, an alarm not meant to please, but to prepare. So why did they brand you paranoid, unstable, overly spiritual? Because clarity unsettles comfort. Because foresight exposes illusion. Because prophecy always offends those who prefer denial. Do not despise prophecies, but test everything. Hold fast what is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:20-21. They despised your foresight until reality itself forced their confession. You weren't speculating. You were receiving. Now the storm has arrived exactly as you said. The relationship fractured. The betrayal surfaced. The golden opportunity rotted into ruin. And suddenly, What they mocked as superstition is revealed as spiritual coding. Your foresight wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy. Your unease wasn't fear, it was divine intelligence. Your warnings weren't wild guesses, they were heaven's downloads. So rise. Do not diminish the gift that sets you apart. Do not water down the signals to please a world addicted to noise. Stand as the one who carries foresight, who dares to speak warnings before proof arrives. What they once mocked is now the very thing keeping you secure. Chosen one, lift your head. The gift of foresight is not a burden, but your crown. You were forged for the very storm they swore would crush you. When their eyes scanned your life, they judged too quickly. There's no way this one survives. They saw the chaos mounting, betrayals stacking, loss compounding, and they whispered that you would fold. Yet they misunderstood the blueprint of your soul. You had already been tempered in furnaces they never stepped into. You had already walked through fire that scorched illusions but could not touch your spirit. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. Isaiah 43:2. What they thought was the end was actually your environment of training. Why does pressure silence them while it sharpens you? Why does betrayal unravel them while it deepens your focus? Could it be that the places that left scars on you also built a resilience they cannot comprehend? While they were cradled in comfort, you were learning survival on the battlefield. While they clung to easy victories, you were mastering how to carry wounds quietly and keep marching. While they only recently entered the storm, you were born in it, baptized by thunder and refined by fire. The Apostle Paul knew this well. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. You embody that paradox. Others mistake your calm for indifference, but calm was carved into you by years of inner warfare. They assume your silence means weakness, but silence was your strategy, absorbing, calculating, preparing. They assume your peace means you don't care, but peace is the trophy of every unseen night you survived. Architecture offers a metaphor. A cathedral's dome does not collapse under storms because its weight is distributed through hidden arches. In physics, materials under intense pressure either crack or transform into diamonds. And in music, a symphony builds its greatest strength in the quietest pause before the crescendo. That is you. Your stillness is not absence. It is tension mastered, strength stored, power prepared. They thought the heartbreak would destroy you, but it trained you. They thought betrayal would finish you, but it awakened you. They thought rejection would silence you, but it rooted you deeper. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 40:31. Every wound became a workshop. Every tear became a teacher. Every loss became a lesson. And history proves that storms reveal the difference between those who are sheltered and those who are seasoned. Job was stripped of wealth, health, and companionship, yet declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." Job 13:15. His storm revealed faith no trial could break. In the same way, what others call disaster becomes the ground where your destiny takes root. To make it tangible, consider Rosa, a single mother who worked 2 jobs after her husband abandoned her. Neighbors pity her, whispering she would collapse under the weight. Yet in silence she studied, saved, and started a small bakery. Years later, while those who mocked her still scrambled for stability, she stood as a pillar of resilience. Isn't that your story? They judged too soon. But storms don't break those who were built for fire. Nature itself testifies. The oak tree is not strong because it avoided storms, but because its roots drove deeper with every gust of wind. Volcanoes, violent as they are, create soil so rich it births vineyards. Lightning, terrifying in the night sky, fertilizes the earth with nitrogen that sustains life. What destroys others, you transform into power. And what of those who mocked your endurance? History offers examples of those undone by storms they were unprepared for. The Roman Emperor Commodus, intoxicated by luxury, imagined himself invincible. But when unrest erupted, his lack of discipline turned triumph into downfall, strangled in his own palace, undone by his untrained spirit. His collapse proves this truth. Storms expose the hollow. Now their panic contrasts your peace. They are only now meeting the battlefield that raised you. They are scrambling for clarity while you walk with calm. They are reacting in fear while you move in wisdom. Their illusions crack under thunder while your roots deepen. They mistook survival for weakness, but survival was your strategy. They mistook your scars for shame, but scars were your certification. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and he helps me. Psalm 28:7. So rise. Do not hide the fire you became. Do not shrink from storms that prove your design. Stand as one who carries battle scars, not as burdens but as banners. The chaos that breaks others is the climate that built you. Chosen one, lift your head because you weren't just built to endure storms. You were built to lead in them. You didn't just walk through fire, you became fire. They never respected your warnings, not because you lacked clarity, but because they were addicted to control. Their obsession with dominance blinded them. You could walk into a room, speak a single truth, and shake the fragile scaffolding of their carefully constructed world. And why did that terrify them so deeply? Because people addicted to control cannot tolerate anything they cannot predict, manipulate, or explain. And you, chosen one, you embodied all three. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. 1 Corinthians 3:19. Your voice carried a clarity not born of research or consensus, but of revelation. Why did your discernment make them so nervous? Why did your presence unsettle their confidence? Could it be because your insight revealed the cracks they fought desperately to conceal? They wanted to be the smartest in the room, the leader, the one with the answers. But when you spoke, you unveiled that their throne was paper-thin. For God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. 1 Corinthians 1:27. Your discernment didn't inflate their pride, it dismantled it. They needed every truth to pass through their filter, every idea to serve their ego. But your words bypassed their gatekeeping. You weren't speaking to impress, you were speaking from the Spirit. And that made you dangerous to their fragile identity. They mocked you, rolled their eyes, changed the subject whenever you opened your mouth. But isn't that what happened to the prophets of old? Jeremiah cried warnings. Yet the people silenced him until Babylon's armies arrived. But if you do not listen to me, I will weep in secret because of your pride. Jeremiah 13:17. A powerful reminder comes from the life of the Italian scientist Galileo Galilei. He spoke truths about the heavens, that the earth moved around the sun, But the authorities of his time condemned him as dangerous because his words dismantled their illusion of control. His insight was not false, it simply did not come from them. Isn't that the same reason they rejected you? Because what you carried didn't feed their pride but exposed their ignorance. And yet art and music echo your journey. In Handel's Messiah, the chorus thunders, "Why do the nations rage?" And the people imagine a vain thing, drawn from Psalm 2:1. That cry captures humanity's arrogance, the illusion of control against the immovable hand of God. Your presence was that chorus in the room, declaring truth that no ego could silence. But while they dismissed you, mocking your discernment, the collapse arrived. The job they worshipped dissolved. The relationships they idolized fractured. The systems they trusted crumbled like brittle clay. Suddenly, the voice they dismissed as dramatic or unstable became the voice they replayed in memory, scrambling to recall what you once said. Isn't it ironic that the very insight they rejected became the map they now chase? Their confidence was not control, it was delusion. They believed if they could not predict it, it could not happen. But prophecy bypasses logic. Revelation outruns reason. Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. Amos 3:7. You weren't operating from calculation, you were connected to the divine frequency. You weren't trying to take their place, you were trying to save them from the collapse you already saw. And while they are left scrambling with no backup plan, no vision, no strategy, you stand steady because heaven gave you blueprints in advance. An ordinary story captures this truth. Miguel, a mechanic in a small town, warned his company that the trucks needed urgent maintenance. His supervisors dismissed him, intoxicated by profits. Months later, a catastrophic breakdown halted the business, costing thousands. Miguel's insight, ignored because it didn't come from the top, was the very truth that could have saved them. Now everything they trusted is rubble. The person they silenced, the one they mocked, is the only one who saw the cracks before the structure fell. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Psalm 127:1. You never craved control, you craved truth. But because they worshipped power, they rejected the very gift that could have preserved them. So rise. Do not bow to the fragile thrones of the proud. Do not apologize for discernment that dismantles illusions. Stand firm. Chosen one. You were never a threat. You were a lifeline. The collapse proves it. Lift your head and declare it boldly. The truth they silenced is the very truth that endures. You read the spiritual climate while they only stared at the forecast. Their eyes were glued to headlines, scrolling through endless reports, listening to politicians, and believing whatever the majority shouted. They trusted numbers, polls, and statistics as if truth could only exist on paper. But what happens when the screen fails to report the storm? What happens when the experts miscalculate? What happens when reality shifts in ways no algorithm can predict? You were built differently. You did not need a forecast to tell you which way the wind was blowing. You felt the atmosphere shift before it ever reached the ground. Like Elijah standing on Mount Carmel, you knew when the rain was coming, long before a single cloud appeared. Elijah said, "Go and look toward the sea." And he went up and looked. "There is nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." 1 Kings 18:43-44. They needed evidence. You carried revelation. They lived by sight, you moved by faith. Why could you walk into a room and sense the tension no one else dared acknowledge? Why did your spirit pick up heaviness before chaos erupted? Could it be because you were wired to discern, not just to observe? They mistook your discernment for impulsiveness, but it was obedience to whispers they could not hear. They clung to facts, you leaned into faith. They needed proof, you already had peace. Nature itself confirms your design. Migratory birds sense magnetic fields and shift direction before storms are visible. Certain flowers close before rain ever falls, protecting their delicate centers from drowning. Like them, you were tuned to invisible signals. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. John 3:8. While they waited for confirmation, you adjusted with the Spirit's breeze. But history also teaches about those who ignored the atmosphere. The French Queen Marie Antoinette clung to illusions of grandeur, mocking warning signs of famine and unrest. She trusted the stability of her palace walls more than the cries of the streets. When the storm of revolution broke, her inability to sense the shifting climate cost her throne and her life. Her tragedy shows what happens when pride blinds the soul to unseen tremors. Meanwhile, your movements puzzled people. They whispered that you were impulsive, overly spiritual, unstable. But weren't you simply obeying what you picked up in the Spirit? Daniel was mocked in Babylon for praying 3 times a day, despite decrees against him. Yet his discernment aligned him with God's unshakable kingdom. For God is not a God of confusion but of peace, 1 Corinthians 14:33. While others bowed to evidence, you bowed to revelation. This truth is mirrored in ordinary lives too. Sophia, a schoolteacher in a small town, once sensed deep unease about attending a seemingly harmless gathering. She politely declined, mocked as antisocial. Hours later, a fire broke out at that very venue. Her peace was not passivity, it was alignment with unseen warnings. Ordinary lives carry extraordinary proof of what happens when the Spirit discerns what the eyes cannot see. Even the arts have captured this paradox. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the soothsayer's cry, "Beware the Ides of March," was ridiculed. Yet it carried truth, ignored by a man intoxicated with power. Like Caesar, many dismissed you because your insight did not flatter their illusions. But time proves prophecy louder than applause. So now, as systems collapse, leaders falter, and relationships crumble, you are not shaken. Why? Because you shifted when God whispered, not when the world screamed. You moved before collapse, not after. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3:5-6. They worshipped the forecast. You read the climate. They reacted in panic. You walked in preparation. Rise, chosen one. Do not trade discernment for applause. Do not silence the gift that guided you when logic failed. The very peace they cannot explain is the proof of your alignment. Stand tall, because when the storm hit, you were not guessing, you were guided. And that is why, while they crumble, you are still standing. The panic is not just about the crisis, it's about your calm. Their chaos intensifies, not merely because their world is falling apart, but because you are not trembling with them. Your stillness becomes the greatest disruption in the storm. How can you stand when everything is shaking? How can you remain quiet when noise is their only strategy for survival? Why does your peace seem so unnatural, so offensive, that it exposes what they try desperately to bury? Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. John 14:27. Your calm unsettles them more than the collapse itself. They wonder how you are still composed, how you keep moving with focus while they drown in panic. Could it be that what terrifies them is not the storm, but the mirror your posture holds up to their unpreparedness? Your peace is not arrogance, not indifference. It is fruit. It is the harvest of nights when you wrestled with truth in silence while they drowned their conscience in distractions. You warned them, like Noah building the ark in clear skies, mocked by those who couldn't imagine rain. Your preparation looked absurd until the flood arrived. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. Hebrews 11:7. They thought you were wasting time, yet the ark of your obedience became your shelter. Now that consequences are here, they are scrambling to fix what you surrendered long ago. The architecture of your spirit resembles a cathedral's foundation, unseen, buried deep, but holding everything above ground steady. While they built their lives on scaffolding of opinions, you built on bedrock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Matthew 7:24. Storms prove foundations, and storms have proven yours. Why did they expect you to collapse with them? Why did they imagine you would join in their panic? Perhaps because misery loves company, and your peace is a refusal to rehearse their chaos. They can't handle that while they're breaking. You are composed. Your stillness exposes the truth they buried. It screams that peace was always possible, but peace required obedience. Even in ordinary lives, this truth is clear. Carlos, a bus driver in a crowded city, quietly saved a portion of every paycheck for years. Mocked by co-workers who wasted theirs on fleeting thrills. When an unexpected layoff struck the company, panic consumed them. Carlos, though shaken, remained calm. His preparation had already created provision. Isn't that the same rhythm you embody? Quiet choices, hidden alignment, strength misunderstood until the storm hit. History also offers warnings. King Belshazzar, intoxicated with power in Babylon, mocked the sacred vessels of God's temple during a feast. Yet a hand appeared, writing judgment on the wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. He was terrified, but it was too late. His downfall came that very night. Daniel 5:25-30. Belshazzar's panic wasn't just about judgment, it was the exposure of arrogance that refused warning. Your calm carries the opposite weight, the assurance that comes from reverence, not rebellion. Even music captures this mystery. In Avopert's Spiegel, I am Spiegel. Silence stretches between notes like eternal breaths, reminding us that stillness itself can be louder than noise. Your calm has become that kind of sound, preaching without words, convicting without speeches. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. While they interpreted stillness as weakness, it was the shield that made you untouchable. So now, they are not just grieving crisis, they are grieving realization. They see that what breaks them is the very thing you already adjusted to. They realize that your peace was not luck, it was alignment. That you weren't bothered, you were anchored. That your silence was not absence, it was strategy. And now, while they stumble in chaos, the one they mocked walks through fire with grace. they cannot explain. Rise. Chosen one. Do not apologize for peace that took years of obedience to build. Do not shrink from stillness that disarms storms. Stand boldly. Because your calm is not the absence of struggle, it is the evidence of alignment. Lift your head. The world is learning that your silence screams. Your calm preaches. And your peace is the prophecy they cannot ignore. You were never trying to impress them. You were sent as a warning. A messenger clothed not in titles but in truth. Applause was never your pursuit. You didn't speak because you wanted to sound wise, spiritual, or impressive. You spoke because you carried a weight that would not let you stay silent. That weight wasn't ego, it was responsibility. The word of the Lord is like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot. Jeremiah 20:9. You saw what they refused to see. You felt what they numbed themselves to ignore. And even when you knew rejection would follow, you showed up anyway, because the assignment was never about approval. It was always about obedience. Why did your spirit ache when others laughed? Why did you tremble with urgency when they demanded entertainment? Could it be that heaven chose you to interrupt cycles of destruction before those cycles destroyed them? You weren't chasing recognition, you were burdened by revelation. You weren't aiming to win arguments, you were trying to shield lives from collapse. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel, so hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. Ezekiel 33:7. Yet they mistook protection for provocation. They thought you were challenging their authority when you were pleading for their safety. They didn't want your message, not because they couldn't hear, but because hearing meant accountability. Isn't that the tragedy, that truth was rejected not for lack of clarity but for fear of change? They couldn't recognize you as a messenger because you didn't come wrapped in the packaging they trusted. No fame, no degrees, no titles, only discernment, urgency, and a courage that refused to bow. The writer Fyodor Dostoevsky once said, "Above all, don't lie to yourself." His words echo your mission. For your presence stripped away illusions they desperately clung to. They tried to box you in, dismiss your warnings, twist your motives. But what they mocked as judgment was mercy disguised as confrontation. Those whom I love I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. Revelation 3:19. Art has long captured this tension. In Verdi's Requiem, the Dies Irae explodes with thunderous cries of judgment. A sound so terrifying that audiences throughout history have trembled in silence. That same resonance lived in your words, not meant to flatter, but to awaken. Your voice was disruptive, not because it was cruel, but because it carried divine urgency. Now the cycles they refused to break are breaking them. The lies they trusted are crumbling into dust, and the one they silenced is the very voice echoing in their memory, the one they wish they could rewind to hear again. You weren't trying to shine, you were trying to shield. You weren't competing with their pride, you were confronting it with grace. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Proverbs 27:6. What they called arrogance was actually protection. What they labeled a threat was actually mercy showing up in human form, reaching one last time to keep them from sinking. But the truth remains, your silence was never weakness, and your voice was never ego. It was an alignment. If I speak, I am condemned. If I remain silent, I am consumed. Job 32:18-19. That's why you couldn't stay quiet. You were chosen to bear a burden. even if it made you misunderstood. So rise. Do not shrink because they misread your mission. Do not hide because they twisted your motives. The very weight you carry is proof of your calling. Stand boldly, chosen one, because when grace takes human form, when truth refuses to bow, history itself shifts. The voice they tried to silence will become the voice that time vindicates. Their crisis has become your confirmation. You don't need to utter a single word, because their collapse preaches louder than any sermon you could have spoken. The very ones who rolled their eyes, laughed behind your back, and branded your warnings as paranoia, now find themselves locked inside the storm you tried to steer them away from. And, as everything they clung to shatters piece by piece, one truth becomes painfully undeniable. You weren't crazy. You were called. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. What once felt like isolation now feels like validation, and the silence that used to torment you has become your crown. Their downfall doesn't bring you joy, but it does bring you confirmation that heaven was whispering in your spirit long before earth caught up. You don't need a victory lap. This was never about ego. It was about the sacred separation between noise and truth. You didn't crave their applause. You carried God's confirmation. You didn't need their agreement. You only needed time. Because time always unveils what the Spirit already whispered. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false, though it lingers. Wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Habakkuk 2-3. The hands of the clock are not your enemy. They are your ally. Because what you carried in private is now erupting in public. Your obedience outlasted their denial, and now the unfolding reality is your vindication. Why did they call your foresight overthinking? Why did they mock discernment as drama? Could it be because the fruit of their choices hadn't ripened yet? You weren't reacting emotionally. You were God's early alert system. They are now drowning in consequences they once labeled harmless. But you knew those roads led to ruin. Just as surely as Lot warned his sons-in-law of the fire destined for Sodom, the prudent see danger and take refuge. But the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 22-3. What seemed like exaggeration to them was preparation for you. What they dismissed as paranoia has now turned into prophecy fulfilled. And the weight of their regret is heavier than the storm itself. Nature itself testifies to this truth. Certain deep-sea fish detect vibrations of earthquakes long before they reach the shore. Trees bend in subtle angles hours before storms arrive. You were designed with that same spiritual sensitivity, tuned to frequencies others dismissed. While they busy themselves with appearances, you were already rooted in alignment. Their chaos is now your clarity. Their confusion only validates the peace heaven planted inside of you. And just like those trees and creatures, you were mocked for moving too early. But now your early shift has spared you from devastation. The timing of your discernment has proven itself stronger than their denial. History also tells of those undone by ignoring divine warnings. Consider Pharaoh, who hardened his heart against Moses' plea. Plague after plague was dismissed as coincidence until the loss of Egypt's firstborn shook the nation to its knees. Exodus 12:29-30. His obsession with control blinded him, and his downfall proved the very word he mocked. Doesn't that echo the ones who dismissed your voice, only to find themselves enslaved by their own defiance? Their pride has now become their prison, their arrogance the chains that bind them. What was once laughter at your expense has become silence under judgment. and the very warnings they scorned are now playing out in real time before their eyes. But you were never trying to win arguments. You were out to save lives, even if it meant losing relationships. You didn't desire to prove superiority. You were desperate to point them back to what mattered. Yet they chose to gaslight, rewrite, and dismiss. And now the storm screams what you once whispered in silence. You were telling the truth all along. Do not despise prophecies, but test everything. Hold fast what is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:20-21. Their rewriting cannot erase reality, and their dismissal cannot undo destiny. What you carried wasn't meant for their approval, it was meant for their survival. And now survival itself proves the validity of what you carried. An ordinary life reflects this same rhythm. Elena, a quiet nurse in a rural hospital, warned her colleagues about hygiene lapses in their ward. She was mocked as paranoid. Months later, an outbreak swept through the hospital, proving her foresight right. She didn't gloat. She didn't boast. Her calm presence became the mirror of what could have been avoided. Isn't that exactly how your peace feels now? Not triumph over their downfall, but validation of your obedience. Her story is a reminder that the ordinary voice, often dismissed, can be the very one that saves lives. And isn't that what you embody? Truth hidden in humility, carrying weight that others only recognize when it's too late? Their panic cannot erase your preparation. Their downfall cannot silence your discernment. What looked like isolation was God's preservation. What felt like rejection was heaven's redirection. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And now, in the eye of their chaos, your calm is louder than any "I told you so." You were the radar, the spiritual watchtower, the divine mouthpiece they muted. But now, reality rewrites their denial into confession. The collapse itself has become the courtroom, and the verdict is already rendered. You were aligned. You were accurate. You were chosen. Their panic is not your triumph. It is heaven's testimony that you stood where others fell. So, rise. Do not apologize for being the one who heard when others refused to listen. Do not shrink back because they mislabeled your warnings. The very weight you carry is proof of your calling. Stand as the one preserved for such a time as this. Because you weren't the problem, you were the preparation. You weren't sent to scare them, you were sent to save them. And now, heaven itself is thundering the confirmation. You were aligned. You were obedient. And you were right all along. Let this be the moment you stop doubting the gift and start walking boldly in it. The storm has vindicated you, and the silence of those who mocked you is now your proof. Chosen ones, the truth is undeniable now. The world is spinning in panic, but you stand unshaken because you already saw what was coming before it unfolded. While the headlines scream, while governments scramble, while people are running in confusion, you walk with the calm assurance of someone who has been prepared in the secret place. What they call shock, you call confirmation. What they call disaster, you call revelation. For didn't the word already declare, "Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants the prophets." Amos 3-7. That is who you are, one of those servants who heard the whisper before the thunder, who felt the shift before the earthquake. Do you realize what that means? You were chosen to be a light in a moment of global darkness. When everyone else trembles, you remain steady. When fear spreads like wildfire, your spirit radiates peace. And that peace doesn't come from ignoring reality, it comes from walking in alignment with divine reality. It comes from knowing that while kingdoms of men collapse, the kingdom of God stands eternal. You saw it because God trusted you with vision. You held it because He trained you in silence. And now, as the storm unfolds, you are not the one panicking, you are the one guiding. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Your calm presence convicts them. Your unshaken steps remind them of the warnings they ignored, the truths they mocked, the wisdom they dismissed. That is why your peace feels offensive to those who built their lives on illusions. Yet, you must not dim your light to make them comfortable. Remember what Jesus said. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. Your assignment was never to blend in with panic, it was to stand out with peace. And that is exactly what you are doing now. Look back at your journey. How many times did they call you dramatic, paranoid, or too spiritual? How many times did they roll their eyes when you said something was about to shift? And yet, here we are. Their collapse is your confirmation. Their confusion is your clarity. The world may call it coincidence, but heaven calls it obedience. Your discernment was never about winning arguments or gaining applause. It was about saving lives, preserving truth, and pointing back to God when everything else crumbled. And here's the beauty of it. You don't need apologies now. You don't need validation from those who once mocked you. The reality itself has already testified on your behalf. The storm has already proven that you weren't delusional, you were divine. You weren't lost, you were aligned. What you carried wasn't ego, it was revelation. And now, the ones who dismissed you are forced to acknowledge the very insight they tried to bury. Isn't it powerful how God vindicates His chosen without them needing to lift a finger? As Psalm 23:5 declares, You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. The canon many fork. So what comes next for you? Chosen one, you do not just watch the world panic, you rise as a leader in this chaos. You do not merely survive the shaking, you interpret it. You guide others through it. You carry wisdom where others carry fear. And yes, it will be lonely at times. Yes, they may still resist your voice. But know this, you were not chosen for popularity, you were chosen for purpose. The shaking of the world is the stage for your assignment. The panic of others is the platform for your peace. This is the moment heaven trained you for. Let this be your reminder. You are not crazy. You are called. You are not broken. You are built. You are not late. You are aligned. And though the world may crumble, your steps will remain sure because they are ordered by the Lord. As Psalm 37:23 declares, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and He delights in His way. That's why you keep standing when others are falling. That's why you keep moving with grace when others freeze in fear. You are proof that preparation in secret always becomes power in public. And now, chosen ones, I want to speak directly to you. If this message has touched your spirit, if you know this was confirmation of what God already whispered in your soul, do not leave quietly. Drop a comment down below, type 777 as your declaration that you saw it before the world did. And you will stand firm while others panic. Press the like button. Share this video so more chosen ones can be encouraged. And subscribe so you don't miss the next revelation God has for you. Your engagement is more than support. It's a way of spreading light in a world drowning in confusion. To every person who has been faithfully supporting this channel, whether through a simple like, a kind comment, a share, or even through a super thanks. I see you, and I thank you deeply. Your presence means more than numbers. It is part of the community God is building here. And for those who cannot give financially, know this: your attention, your prayers, and your encouragement are treasures in themselves. You are part of this divine movement simply by being here. So I bless you now. May your eyes remain open when others choose blindness. May your spirit stay calm when the world shakes in fear. May your steps be ordered by the Lord. And may your discernment continue to pierce through the fog of panic. May you walk in peace that passes understanding. And may you never forget, you are not just surviving this season. You are leading it. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen.